What if the woman laughing at you right now was about to lose everything she owned, and you were the only person standing in the way? That morning in a Greenwich driveway, nobody knew how close they were to finding out. Before we go further, hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second and it tells me you want more stories like this one. Subscribe if you're new and turn on notifications so you never miss what happens next. Now, let's get into it. My name is Daniel Cole. I am 39 years old. I raised my daughter Lily by myself in a small apartment above the garage I own on Birch Street in Millbrook, Connecticut. The garage is called Cole Auto Works. 2 bays, 1 lift, and a reputation that took me almost 15 years to build in a very small, very specific world. People who own old European sports cars, the kind that don't forgive mistakes, they find me through word of mouth. Nobody just walks in off the street. I didn't grow up around money, and I never expected to end up standing in a driveway that cost more than my entire block. My father was a mechanic too, a quieter version of me, and he taught me the basics before I ever touched a European car. Everything after that, I taught myself, one mistake at a time, in shops that didn't always treat me well until I earned it. The morning this story starts, I had a full shop. A BMW with a stubborn electrical fault, an old Mercedes that belonged to a retired judge who wouldn't let anyone else near it, and a stack of invoices I hadn't gotten around to yet. Then my phone rang. Unknown number, area code I didn't recognize as local. I picked it up anyway because in my business you never know which call is the one that matters. The woman on the line introduced herself as an assistant to someone named Alexandra Reyes. She said Miss Reyes ran an investment firm and that she had a car, a 1971 Porsche 911S, that had been giving her trouble for almost 2 years. 3 different shops had tried to fix it. 2 of them had pulled the engine apart completely and found nothing wrong. The problem always came back within 100 miles. That last detail is what made me listen. A car that runs fine and then breaks down in exactly the same way over and over after professionals have already opened it up and found nothing. That's not really a broken part. That's a relationship between 2 parts that shouldn't exist, and almost nobody knows how to look for it. You need to have been inside an engine like that before. Not read about it. Been inside it. I told the assistant I could come by that afternoon. I hung up, called downstairs to my neighbor Mrs. Ferris, who watches Lily most days after school, confirmed she could pick her up, and got in my truck. The house was the kind of place you see in magazines and assume nobody actually lives in. Long stone driveway, a lawn so perfect it looked painted, a garage bigger than my entire apartment. A young man at the gate checked my name off a list without saying a word and waved me through. Alexandra Reyes was standing near the garage with 3 other people when I pulled up. Dark blazer, expensive watch, the kind of posture you get from a decade of people listening to whatever you say. She looked at my work truck, looked at me, and something in her face told me exactly what she was thinking before she said a word. "You're the mechanic," she said. I told her yes, Daniel Cole, and shook her hand. She introduced her business partner, a heavier man in a gray sweater named Marcus Voss, and 2 assistants standing slightly behind her. Marcus gave me a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'd seen that smile before, on men who decide who matters in a room before anyone's even spoken. "The Porsche is in the garage," Alexandra said. "2nd bay. If you can actually find what 3 other shops missed, I might just marry you." Her assistants laughed. She was joking, obviously. It was the kind of thing rich people say to be charming without thinking about how it lands. I didn't laugh, and I think that surprised her more than anything I said the whole day. I walked into that garage, and I saw the car, and for a second, I forgot how to breathe. 5 other cars sat lined up beside it, all of them expensive, all of them forgettable in a way this one wasn't. The paint had a particular depth to it, an old kind of white you don't see on new cars anymore, and the shape of the body did something to me before I even understood why. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even really about the car being rare, although it was. It was the shape of it, the specific stance, something about the way the light hit the hood that pulled a memory straight out of me before I had time to stop it. I had seen this exact car before. Not a car like it, this one. 10 years earlier, in the summer I turned 26, I spent 4 months working at a small racing workshop outside a German town most Americans have never heard of. My wife Megan was still alive then. We didn't have Lily yet. I was young, and I was being trained by a man named Otto Bergman, one of the most respected old-school Porsche engineers still working, a man who didn't teach with words so much as with silence and correction. He taught me to listen to an engine the way you'd listen to a person you loved, for the small things that mean something is wrong before anything actually breaks. I popped the hood of Alexandra's car and looked at the engine bay, and there it was. A hand-fabricated bracket near the oil scavenge system, angled just slightly off from anything factory, with a welding pattern I recognized because I had watched Otto make brackets exactly like it with his own hands. He only ever made a handful of these outside official production, each one for a car he personally rebuilt. I had helped install 2 of them myself. I wiped a thumb across a tiny stamped mark at the base of the bracket. 4 letters and a number. Otto's private mark. My hands went very still, the way they used to go still when he was watching me work, and I didn't want to embarrass myself. Behind me, Alexandra asked if I'd found something. I straightened up slowly. "I need to ask you something," I said. "When did your family get this car?" She said her father bought it decades ago from a dealer in Germany, kept it there for a while, then brought it to the States. I asked if it had already been restored when he bought it. She said yes. "Then someone's been inside this engine in the last year or 2, I told her, and they replaced something that should never have been touched." Marcus shifted his weight. It was small, almost nothing, but I noticed it the way you notice a door opening somewhere else in a quiet house. I explained what I'd found. A modern aftermarket part had been swapped in where an original hand-built modification used to sit. The 2 didn't fit together correctly. Under normal driving, everything seemed fine. But once the metal warmed up and expanded after sustained driving, the new part shifted out of alignment with the old bracket, and that's exactly when the misfire and pressure loss would show up. Right around 100 miles. Every single time. Marcus asked, with a little too much confidence, if I was really suggesting 3 professional shops had all missed something this basic. I looked at him directly for the first time. Those shops were diagnosing a modern Porsche, I said. This isn't a modern Porsche. This is a car with modifications that exist in no factory manual anywhere. If you don't already know they're there, you will never find them. Alexandra made a small sound, almost a laugh, softer this time. "Fix it, and I really will marry you, Mr. Cole," she said. I didn't laugh either time. I think that's when she started actually looking at me instead of just seeing a guy in a work shirt. I told her I needed 3 days and access to the car. She said I could work right there in her garage. I agreed, said I'd be back at 8 the next morning, and drove home. I sat in my truck in her driveway for a minute before starting the engine. Then I called a number I hadn't dialed in almost 2 years. Klaus Renner, 72 years old, retired, living about half an hour away in Westchester County. I'd met him at a vintage car meet years back, and he'd immediately recognized something in the way I talked about engines, something that told him I'd trained under someone real. We'd stayed loosely in touch ever since. He answered on the 4th ring, same slow, careful voice I remembered. "Klaus, I need you to confirm something for me," I said. Otto built a handful of brackets outside the official shop, personal projects, cars he restored himself. I worked on 2 of them with him. "Do you know which cars those were?" There was a long pause before he answered. "Why are you asking?" he said. "Because I think I just found one," I told him, "in a garage in Connecticut, on a car that was bought from a German dealer and brought to the States years ago." He went quiet again, longer this time. Then he said that car sounded exactly like one Otto had personally owned for a couple of years before selling it, to help pay for his son's schooling. The buyer had come through a broker. Otto never met him directly, but Klaus remembered the name from something Otto mentioned once, a man named Charles Reyes. I sat at my own kitchen table that night, quiet for a long time. "That was Alexandra's father," I said, once I found my voice. Klaus said Otto had kept detailed handwritten logs of every car he personally restored, bound in his own volumes, and that after Otto passed away, his daughter had inherited them and loaned them long-term to a museum archive back in Germany, though she still had full access to them. My signature, from that summer 10 years ago, would be right there on the paperwork. I asked Klaus for a favor, a scanned copy of every page mentioning that specific car. He said he'd call Otto's daughter the next morning and see if she could scan them directly, faster than going through the museum's formal process. I told him I'd cover whatever it cost, and that I needed it within the week if possible. He didn't ask why the rush, which told me he already understood. Some things you don't wait on once you realize what they might mean. Before we hung up, Klaus told me something I wasn't ready for. He said Otto had written a short note about me in that old logbook. Not just my signature. A note about the American who understood the work without needing things explained twice. He'd used my first name. He liked me, Klaus said. I didn't say anything for a while after that call ended. I thought about that summer, about the smell of the workshop, about Otto's hands, about Megan visiting for 2 weeks that August, laughing at something Otto said about American men mistaking loud engines for good ones. She died a little over 4 years later. Stage 4 breast cancer, she was 31. Lily was barely 3. I quit racing not long after and moved back to Connecticut to start the shop, and I hadn't been back to Germany since. The doorbell rang. Mrs. Ferris was bringing Lily up. She came in wearing her school uniform, carrying the small wooden toy car her grandfather had carved for her the year she was born, 4 wheels that actually spin, a little worn from being carried everywhere. I made her pasta, because apparently that's what we'd agreed on, and tried to focus on being her dad instead of thinking about a garage 40 minutes away. If this story has you hooked already, do me a favor and drop a comment telling me what you think Daniel is going to find next. It helps this video reach more people, and honestly, I read every single comment. I went back to Alexandra's estate the next morning, right on time. A young man on staff, introduced as Marco, showed me to a clean workbench and told me to ask for anything I needed. I told him I needed to be left alone, and he nodded and walked off without another word. For the first hour and a half, I didn't touch a single bolt. I photographed the entire engine bay from every angle I could think of, wrote down every part number visible, and documented exactly what was there before I changed anything. I wanted a record. If anything went missing later, I wanted proof it wasn't me. Alexandra came out around mid-morning with coffee in her hand, hair down, looking less like a CEO and more like a person. She asked if I'd slept. I said yes, which was technically true and completely beside the point. She watched me work for a few minutes without saying much, then asked why I was so focused on documenting everything before touching anything. Because it's an unusual car, I said. She said that was an odd thing for a mechanic to worry about. I didn't argue. She left for a call and I kept working. I worked through lunch without noticing, the way you do when a job finally starts making sense after weeks of somebody else being confused by it. Every bolt I removed matched something in my memory from that summer in Germany, like walking through a house I used to live in and finding all the furniture exactly where I'd left it. By early afternoon, I'd confirmed everything. The replacement part had come from a company that built performance parts for people who cared about raw speed and nothing about originality. On its own, decent part. Completely wrong for this engine, and installed in a way that disabled the function of Otto's original bracket entirely. Not carelessly. Precisely. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were breaking. I drove home that evening, picked up Lily, made dinner, read to her, put her to bed, and then sat down with my laptop and pulled every public filing I could find on Alexandra's investment firm. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Her firm managed billions of dollars, built largely on her late father's original investment and her own decisions since taking over. Certain personal vehicles, including this Porsche, were listed as collateral against private credit lines tied to firm operations, which meant they showed up in regulatory paperwork. And there it was, in black and white. The 1971 Porsche 911S, valued on the most recent filing at under $200,000. A real, fully authenticated example of this exact car, with genuine documentation tracing back to a personal restoration by a master engineer like Otto, would sell today for well over $1 million, maybe closer to $1.5 million, depending on the buyer. The provenance alone, the fact that Otto personally built it, added hundreds of thousands on its own, because so few of his personal projects exist anywhere in the world. Somebody had deliberately made this car look worth a fraction of what it actually was. On paper, the firm actually used. I sat there staring at the screen for a long time before I finally closed the laptop and went to bed. The next morning, I called a lawyer I'd worked with once before, a man named Robert Hale, who practiced business law out of an office downtown. I told him I needed 30 minutes and would pay for his time. He asked what it concerned. I told him I'd rather explain it in person. I brought everything: the filings, my photographs, comparable auction prices for authentic cars like this one, and a short written summary of what I'd observed. He read through all of it without interrupting, maybe 12 minutes of silence while he worked through the pages. When he finally looked up, he asked if I was saying someone had deliberately altered the car to hide its real history, while also making sure it was listed at a fraction of its real value on the firm's books. I said yes. He asked who would have both the access and the reason to do that. I told him my best guess was Marcus Voss, the business partner, though I couldn't prove it yet. If he's found a way to acquire the car himself, quietly, at that low paper value, Robert said, and then sell it later for what it's actually worth, that's a difference of well over $1 million in his pocket. And if Alexandra has no idea what the car really is, she'd have no reason to ever question the number on the page. He leaned back. "You understand what you're describing is a serious federal crime," he said. I told him I understood. He asked if I was sure I wanted to be the one to bring this forward, since it would mean my name attached to something much bigger than a repair job. I told him I wasn't doing this because I wanted to be involved. I was doing it because I couldn't unknow what I now knew, and walking away felt like leaving her standing in traffic. He said he couldn't formally represent me since I wasn't the client in this, but he could tell me what he'd do in my position, which was prepare a detailed briefing, bring in a forensic accountant who specialized in exactly this kind of fraud, and find a quiet, careful way to get the information directly to Alexandra before Marcus had any idea she knew. He gave me his card, told me to hand it to her and say he handled matters like this. Nothing more specific than that. Nothing that could be intercepted or misread. I drove back out to Greenwich the next day and kept working on the car like nothing had changed. I found a period-correct replacement part through a specialist collector out of state who kept a private stash of genuine old Porsche components, had it shipped overnight, and installed it carefully against Otto's original bracket. Everything fit exactly the way it should have. Pressure held steady. No leaks. I took the car out for a test drive myself first, a long loop through back roads, nearly 40 miles, and the misfire never came back. The engine ran exactly the way Otto had built it to run 10 years ago, halfway around the world. When I got back, Alexandra was outside near the pool, finishing a phone call. I told her it was running properly and asked if she wanted to confirm it herself. She took the keys without a word and drove off. She was gone almost 40 minutes, long enough that I started to wonder if something had gone wrong, before I told myself she was probably just enjoying it, driving the way you drive when you finally trust the car underneath you again. When she came back, she got out slowly, closed the door with the kind of care you use on something you'd forgotten you loved, and walked over to me. She asked what she owed me. I told her my rate for 3 days, plus the part, a little under $3,000. She said she wanted to pay me 10 times that. I told her no, that wasn't what the work was worth, and she could tip me if she wanted to feel generous, but it wouldn't change the actual number. She looked at me for a long moment and said I was an unusual person. I didn't answer that. Instead, I handed her Robert's card and told her there was a related matter she needed to look into, and that he could explain it better than I could. She asked what I'd found. I told her I wasn't the right person to explain it, that she needed to call him, and soon. She paid me by transfer before I even left the property, and put the card in her coat pocket without another word. Before we go further, if you've made it this far, I need you to subscribe right now, not later, right now, because what happens next is the part most people can't believe actually occurred. She called Robert the next morning. I didn't hear the details, but 2 days later he called to tell me she had formally hired him and that everything discussed was now protected under privilege. He thanked me for the referral and said a forensic accountant would be brought in immediately. I went back to my normal work. I kept working on other cars during those 2 weeks, but part of my mind stayed in that Greenwich garage the whole time. I found myself checking my phone more than usual, half expecting either good news or bad news, not sure which one I was actually bracing for. Then a woman named Anna Petrova called, introducing herself as the forensic accountant working with Robert on the case. She asked detailed, careful questions about exactly what I'd found in the engine bay and when I believed the aftermarket part had been installed. The call lasted about 40 minutes. Near the end, she told me the car itself was actually the smallest part of what they'd uncovered. She said the broader pattern went into 8 figures. I didn't ask anything further after that. A week later, Robert called again. Alexandra had decided to move forward with both a civil lawsuit and a criminal referral. The civil complaint would be filed in state court, and because the fraud involved transactions across state lines, the criminal case would go to federal investigators. He told me that given my role in identifying the original problem, I'd likely be called as a witness in both proceedings. I said I would do it. The civil complaint was filed in early November, naming Marcus Voss and 2 companies he controlled, alleging breach of duty, fraud, and self-dealing. He was served at his home on a quiet evening. Federal agents executed search warrants at the firm's offices and at his house not long after. Sealed charges were unsealed when he was formally arrested and released on a substantial bond. That same week, on a cold Tuesday morning, Marcus Voss walked into my shop. I was alone. Lily was at school. Mrs. Ferris was out. He walked in without knocking, wearing an expensive coat, his usual polish noticeably worn thin. He told me he had an offer. He set a folded check on my workbench without me touching it. $200,000, he said, in exchange for me becoming unavailable as a witness, claiming memory problems, whatever it took, as long as the timeline got pushed back. I told him I wasn't interested. He said it was a one-time offer. I told him it ended right there. His face changed then into something colder, more calculated. He mentioned Lily by name, said he knew which school she went to, what time she got out, which route she sometimes walked. He said it so casually it took me a second to fully understand what he was doing. I put down the tool in my hand and told him to get out of my shop. He picked the check back up, folded it into his coat, and left without another word. I called the local detective who'd first been involved in the case 10 minutes later and told him exactly what had been said, exactly which details Marcus had used, exactly what the offer had been. He took it seriously immediately and coordinated with federal investigators within hours. A protective watch was set up around Lily's school and my shop within a day. The threat was added directly to the federal case as witness intimidation, and it significantly increased what Marcus was now facing. His legal team started negotiating a plea within the week. It was finalized in early January. Marcus Voss pleaded guilty to wire fraud and witness tampering. He was sentenced to 3 years in federal custody, ordered to pay millions in restitution, forced to give up his stake in the firm entirely, and barred permanently from working in finance again. Quick pause here, because if you're still watching this far in, you already care how this ends, so do me one favor and smash that like button before we finish. It genuinely helps this story reach more people who need to hear it. I testified at his sentencing. I described the engine bay, the timeline, the technical details, and the conversation in my shop about my daughter. My voice was steady the whole time, even when I got to the part about Lily's school. The judge specifically noted that threat as a serious aggravating factor when handing down the sentence, and for a moment, sitting in that courtroom, I felt something in my chest finally loosen after weeks of carrying it tight. Walking out of that courthouse afterward, the sky was that flat gray you only get in Connecticut in January, right after a storm passes through. I drove home, picked up Lily, made dinner, and we watched her favorite movie for what felt like the 10th time. She fell asleep against my arm with her little wooden car resting on her chest, and I carried her to bed. I didn't see Alexandra again until the last week of January. She came into the shop on a quiet afternoon, jeans and a coat, carrying something wrapped in plain paper under her arm. She said she should have called first. I told her she didn't need to. She handed me the package. I knew what it was before I opened it. Klaus had arranged it with Otto's daughter. It was the original logbook, not a scanned copy, the actual handwritten volume, loaned to me directly for a few months before it needed to go back. I opened it to the page documenting the original restoration, dated that summer 10 years earlier. My own signature sat at the bottom of the work order. Below it, in Otto's handwriting, a short note in German. I translated it slowly in my head. Something like, "The American has the hands. Whether he has the patience, only time will tell, but I believe he will." Alexandra asked what it said. I told her it meant Otto thought I might turn out all right. She asked if I had. I said my wife thought so. My daughter, I hoped, would too. The rest, I said, was harder to know for certain. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said she wanted to actually thank me properly, not with money. She told me there was a classic car restoration program being built at a local racetrack, and they needed someone to lead the technical side. The pay would be less than what I made running my own shop, but the work would be exactly what I used to do before everything changed. She said Klaus had recommended me himself, the moment they asked. I told her I had a daughter who needed stability and a business I'd built from nothing. She said the track wasn't far, that I could keep my shop and still take this on. She said all she was asking was that I have a conversation with them. I asked why she was doing any of this. She said because I'd done something for her that I hadn't been asked to do, and she'd spent months trying to figure out how to actually thank me for it. She said she just wanted me doing work that matched who I actually was. I told her I'd have the conversation. She turned to leave, then paused at the door and apologized for the joke she'd made that first morning about marrying me if I fixed her car. She said she hadn't known who I was. I told her that was never the point. That's not what the work is for. Nobody's supposed to know what you're carrying just by looking at your hands. She smiled, a real one this time, not the polished kind she probably used in boardrooms. "It suits you," she said, not knowing. "Keeps people honest around you." She asked if she could meet Lily sometime, not as a CEO, just as a person. I told her if Lily wanted to, that would be fine. After she left, I stood at the workbench for a long time with that logbook open, my finger resting on my own signature from 10 years earlier. Lily came home a little after 3 that day with a drawing from school, our apartment with a Porsche parked out front. She told me she'd never actually ridden in one, but thought maybe someday she would, and the drawing was just in case. I taped it to the fridge, right beside a photo of Megan that had been hanging there since before Lily could walk. That night, after she was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with the logbook open next to her little wooden car. I thought about Otto, about Megan, about the 14 years between the page in front of me and the moment I stood in a stranger's garage and recognized a bracket I'd helped build when I was 26 years old, back when I had no idea who I'd eventually become. Some things take years to find their way back to where they belong. Some things take almost no time at all. You never really know which kind you're dealing with until you stop fighting how time actually works and just let it happen. I thought about the version of me that stood in that workshop in Germany at 26, certain his whole life was already figured out, and how wrong that version of me turned out to be, and how glad I am that he was wrong. I thought about how Otto never once told me I was talented. He just kept handing me harder work, over and over, until one day I realized that was his way of saying it. Some men show you respect by trusting you with more, not by telling you how good you are. I thought about the check Marcus Voss left on my workbench, and how easy it would have been to justify taking it, just this once, for Lily, for the shop, for a future that felt uncertain most days anyway. I didn't take it, not because I'm some kind of hero, but because I kept picturing Otto's handwriting in that logbook, and I didn't want to be the kind of man who disappoints someone who'd already been gone for years. So here's what I keep coming back to. If you'd been standing in that garage instead of me, recognizing the work of the man who taught you everything, right after someone made a joke at your expense without knowing who you really were, what would you have done? Would you have told her everything right there on the spot? Would you have walked away and said nothing? Or would you have done exactly what I did and let the work speak first? Maybe you'd have said something the moment you recognized that bracket. Maybe you'd have stayed quiet a little longer, the way I did, and let the truth arrive on its own schedule instead of forcing it. There's no single right answer here. There's just the answer that fits who you actually are underneath everything you've built to survive. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story actually meant something to you, if it made you think about the quiet people in your own life who might be carrying more skill and more history than you ever gave them credit for, hit like, subscribe for more stories like this, and send this to someone who needs to hear it today. Because the people who really build things rarely announce it themselves. You have to be paying attention to ever find out.